Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And it's an honor to be the first speaker to start off this session. I'm going to be talking about changing behavior, and what I normally do when I start off presentations to a live audience is that I ask them about blood donation. I say, how many people here, I get them to put up their hand. I say, how many people here think blood donation is a good idea? And virtually everybody puts their hand up. And now I've been doing this for 21 years, and I've done it in a lot of presentations to in a lot of countries. And it's always the same thing. Everybody thinks blood donation is a good idea. And then I say, I point out to people, it's a bit of an icebreaker, and I say, why do you think blood donation is a good idea? Why do you think, what makes you think blood donation is a good idea? And I point out to about 5 people, and each of them can readily come up with a reason why they think blood donation is a good idea. So from that, I feel that that everybody has the right attitude about blood donation, that it's important, and everybody is aware of why blood donation is important. Yet, I then go to ask people, put up your hand if you've given blood in the last 6 months, last year. I go back to 5 years and ask people to keep their hand up. And there's just a smattering of hands in the audience. And the reason for that is that only 3.8% of Americans donate blood. Now, only 38% of Americans can donate blood, but still only 1 out of 10 that can give blood does, even though everybody thinks it's a great idea and they know why it's such a great idea. Let me give you another example. Doctors washing hands. Now, I say doctors, but I mean all medical professionals, doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals working in hospitals and medical facilities. You would think that, I think it's fair to assume that doctors and nurses and other medical professionals have the attitude that it's really important to wash your hands in a medical facility when you're going from one patient to another. And they know the reasons why. They go to school for forever, and they know all about bacteria and viruses and transmitting diseases. So they're perfectly aware of why they should be washing their hands when they go from one patient to another. Yet, in a study in the US in 2015, they observed medical professionals, and they found that only 50% were compliant with hand washing protocols at work. So even though they all believe it's important, they're not doing it. So in that study, there was 4,000 caregivers, more than 4,000 caregivers. The people washing them, and they were washing them in a manner, in a manner that that the people didn't know they were being watched and being observed. And so they watched 14 million washing hands opportunities, and only half of the time, 50% of the time, the doctors or nurses actually washed their hands when they were supposed to. And it appears that later in the day, they got tired of even washing their hands half the time, and the compliance was 38% lower in the afternoon than it had been for the whole day, which would mean that if you were going to get hit by a bus, you should try and get hit by a bus in the morning, because you'd have a better chance when you got to the emergency room that the doctors and nurses attending to you had actually washed their hands before they came to you. This problem with people not washing their hands in medical facilities extrapolates to 600,000 unnecessary infections in a year, 35,000 unnecessary deaths, and $12.5 billion in added costs to a medical system that is already way too expensive. So what's all that about then? Why am I going on about blood donation and doctors and nurses washing hands? Well, the fact is that there's a big gap between people having the attitude and an awareness of an issue and the intention to do something about it, and that to actually undertake that barrier or that activity, that action. This is a huge gap that is often, as I've shown in those 2 examples, often not or it often prevents the people from doing what they should be doing. So this is such a truism that psychologists have a name for the phenomenon. They call it the intention-action gap, or it's sometimes referred to as attitude-behavior gap, or the value-action gap. And the point of it is that for those of us who work in outreach, on weeds, invasive species, whatever it might be, climate change, energy conservation, it's just, we can't just convince people that it is a good idea to take action and then sit back and expect that the behavior will follow, because that's not how it works. You can't expect that the behavior will follow, as I've shown you. And in fact, if you've been working in outreach, trying to get people to take particular actions, and you're finding that they're not, and you're thinking, what do I need to do to get through to these idiots? Why aren't they doing this? It doesn't mean you haven't been doing a good job. You might be doing a fantastic job of getting people aware of the issue and to have the attitude of that they should be taking action, but they aren't because of this intention-action gap. So what I'm going to be talking about is how we can bridge that gap and make our outreach programs more effective by implementing a layer of behavioral psychology. Now, I do want to point out that I'm not saying use behavior psychology instead of the awareness and attitude and more normal or more regular, I guess, outreach that is done, because the right attitude is still really important. This person is really unlikely to take that action because her attitude is such that she doesn't think she should doing it, stupid or whatever. So it's still important to build awareness. It's still important to have build the right attitude. You just can't stop there. So let's talk about behavior change and how we're going to bridge that gap by addressing the behaviors, the barriers rather, addressing the behaviors and not just the attitude and the awareness. But think of the attitude and awareness and the behaviors themselves as a three-legged stool. You're going to have to address them all. So I'm going to talk to you about doing research, about removing barriers and promoting benefits, about securing commitments from people, reminding people of what it is they're supposed to do, and to develop a culture or a social norm of undertaking your behavior. Before I get into some of those details, though, I'd just like to talk a little bit about a couple of, just to help establish sort of the background that we work in when we're doing these things. This is the innovation adoption curve. And under that curve, in all of the green that's there, you're seeing a population. Everybody in a certain population is under there. So it could be all the population of the United States. It could be all anglers. It could be all people on ATVs. It could be all hikers. Whatever the population is, they're all represented under there. And generally speaking, you have innovators and early adopters who are going to take on your behavior because it's the right thing to do and they believe in it and they don't need any other tools. That probably everybody in the rooms or in their rooms, in the virtual room, watching this presentation fall into innovators and early adopters. You work in stopping invasive species, stopping the spread of weeds. You're already bought into it. And if there's something that you should be doing, you're likely going to be doing it. Later, there's an early majority who aren't just going to adopt the behavior because it's the right thing to do. They're going to need some more convincing. And some of these tools I'm going to talk about are going to get those people on board after the innovators and early adopters. And eventually, what we want to do is get over that curve, get over that 50% part, and where we start onto the downslope there. That's the tipping point. And if we have a majority of the population that's has adopted our preferred behavior, and other people are starting to see it in that late majority, then they're going to feel some pressure, some peer pressure to do the right thing. And maybe they don't even understand it, but they look around and they say, geez, everybody's doing this. Maybe it's important. Maybe I should be doing it too. So there's going to be more tools I'm going to talk about that are going to help with that late majority. The laggards may come along much later, And there's some of them will never come along at all until they, and you know, you may not reach 100% of this curve until some of those laggards actually die off. And in a generation, those innovators they've been replaced by innovators who have grown up with the new system. Recycling is much like that. The younger people have known recycling all their lives. Some people who never did get into recycling are no longer with us. So that's just part of life cycle as well. And then the other thing I want to talk about is consciousness, subconsciousness, and unconsciousness. This is really important to understand as well. The human mind operates at three levels: conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. Unconscious is stuff that you don't even think about. So, you know, you don't think oh, it's really hot, I better sweat. Your body just starts sweating. Your heart pumps and gets blood all through your body. That's done without you having to think about it. It's a good thing. You wouldn't go, oh, better beat again. Oh, better beat again. That all happens. Flight or fight is also another thing. So you're walking down a trail and all of a sudden the bush rattles near you. You're going to be startled. You might run away. You might brace yourself for an animal that's going to attack you. That's unconscious behavior. You don't really have to think about it. It's very automatic. You can't stop it if you didn't want to. Now, subconscious behavior, I think my best example that I have to explain what subconscious behavior is that if you're not commuting this year, but if you normally commute to work, and you drive, you're probably like me, there've been times when you've pulled into the parking lot at work and then you said, holy crap, I don't even remember getting here. I don't remember driving here. And that's subconscious activity. Driving is really complicated. You've got to drive. You've got to make sure you don't run through red lights. You don't hit any pedestrians. Don't run into any other cars. Make left turns at lights and wait till the light's right. Gauge the speed of the traffic coming along. Make sure there's no pedestrians in the crosswalk when you turn. It's all very, very complicated. Yet we can do it subconsciously because we've done it so many times. It gets pushed into our subconscious and we don't really have to even think about it. Now throw in a detour suddenly and we have to find a new way of getting there. Then we're into conscious. We've got to be making decisions. We've got to be calculating things. It becomes very, very complicated. The thing about conscious behavior is it's like looking at a spreadsheet or doing detailed work. It's tiring. It takes a lot more of the energy of your mind. And so sometimes when you're having difficulty getting people to adopt a new behavior, it's because they're having to use that conscious part of their brain. And our brains only have so much capacity to do conscious behavior. So what we want to accomplish is while we get those people involved in our behavior, doing our behavior through and following that curve that I showed you before, we also want to get these activities, get them at first as conscious behaviors, but we want them to become subconscious behaviors that they start doing just because they always do. It's a habit. And habits, as we all know, are hard to break. So we want to make these good habits and put them in their subconscious. So that's what we're going to try and achieve. Let's get on with it. So first thing, I always talk about research. It's not the most exciting portion of it, but it's just so important. We have to do research to identify barriers and motivators, especially. I'll explain what those are in a second. And also to establish a baseline of how many people right now are undertaking our behaviors. So the research methods that we typically use when we're doing behavioral psychology and outreach is we do literature reviews. Literature reviews are great because they capitalize on work that others have done. Perhaps there's somebody somewhere else in the United States that has just about to take on, or that was about to take on a similar project as that you're looking at, and they've done a full review of the literature and they have it published. If you can find something like that, that's fantastic. You'll get a lot of information from other sources, or you may have to do your own literature review. Take a look to see what is in journals and magazines and on the web. Find out what people are saying about getting people to undertake similar behaviors. Surveys are really important because you can do a survey And you can sample with a relatively small portion of the population and find out, ask people like, why don't you clean, drain, dry your boat? Why don't you clean your ATV after you're on a trail? Why don't you clean your boots? And find out what's preventing them from doing it and the motivators that might be making other people do it. And then you can extrapolate it to the whole population. Focus groups, on the other hand, you can drill down, but you would typically drill down on certain issues that you want to explore more, but typically you have about 8 to 10 people in a focus group. So whatever the findings are that's what you've heard from 8 to 10 people. You can't extrapolate it to a larger group. The best thing, if you can do it, is to observe, though. Observe what people are doing, just like they were observing those doctors and nurses in the hospitals. Because if you did a survey of doctors and nurses in a hospital and you said, do you wash your hands before or between going from one patient to another, I bet you'd get about 98% of them saying, yes, I do. I always do. But when you observe them, you'll see something different, or you may see something different. And those were observations that were done in that study I referenced. So observational research is really the gold standard if you can do it. You can't always do it, though. The main thing is do whatever research you can afford. So if you can do literature reviews and surveys and observational studies, for instance, you've got the budget to do them all. But if you don't have much of a budget, and I've worked with people that have no budget, then try and do what you can for free, like do Google searches, try and find out what other people have found out, talk to people. But you've got to do your research as best you can. But when you do the research, what you want to do is find out the barriers and benefits that people have. So typically, if I was to do a survey and I wanted to find out why people were, or if they were cleaning their boots and their pants after they came off a hiking trail. And if they weren't, why not? I would ask in the survey, when you come off a hiking trail, do you, or how often do you, for instance, brush the mud off your boots and brush any plant material off your pants? And if people said they don't do it, then I'd say, well, why not? And what they're going to tell me is the barriers. Perhaps they forget, perhaps they don't have the equipment, perhaps they don't know what to do, what the heck I'm talking about. And so we record that. But for those people who say that they do, then we say, well, why do you? And we then learn about the motivators and the benefits that might help us when we're trying to get other people to do it. So if someone was to say, well, I do it because I want to make sure I don't have any ticks on me anyway, so I'm brushing all that off. Well, that's great. We don't care if it's to stop the spread of weeds, or if it's to make sure that they don't have any ticks on them. As long as they're doing it, we're happy, right? So, so we want to find out what those motivators are. The key thing is ask people. You can't assume. People that are watching this presentation, probably a whole bunch of really good scientists, a bunch of researchers, a bunch of people that work out in the field and really know the field very well. You're experts in what you do, but you're not experts in what other people are thinking. And you have to get over the fact that you might think that you know what other people are thinking. You can't possibly, unless you ask them. So you have to find that out. I've been doing surveys for over 30 years, and I'll tell you, I haven't done a single survey that I didn't learn something new from. So you have to do that. But once you do determine the barriers, we need to remove them. And to leverage the benefits or the motivators, we'll get into that a little bit more. Just quickly to wrap this bit on research up, the other things we typically do when we do surveys is we try and determine a level of understanding about the issue to make sure that people do understand the issue. And if they don't, then we know that we've got to increase that, and that they have the right attitude. If they have a bad attitude about it, then we want to increase that attitude. You know, that lady that was doing the universal throw up symbol there, she definitely had the bad attitude. If most people were like that, then you need to work on it. You want to establish a baseline of behavior, even if you're asking people what they're doing and you don't know if they're actually answering 100% correctly. At least it establishes a baseline. And there are some techniques I won't get into, but of how to ask questions like that, rather, that can help mitigate the amount of social bias in the answers. And I always ask what communications channels people prefer, like how is it best to reach them? I actually always ask, how did you find out what you know about weeds, for instance? And then I say, and how can we best communicate to you about weeds? And what's really interesting is that almost every survey, we find that the way people have found out about weeds is, or whatever the topic is not the same as the communication channels they prefer. So we can deliver our messages better if we're using communications channels they prefer. So that's it on research. When we get to this point, after we've done the research, we know what the barriers are that are preventing people, because they've told us, from adopting our behaviors, taking the actions we want them to take. So we need to remove the barriers. Now, I like to think of barriers as friction. So they make adoption of the new behavior difficult, like pushing a fridge up a steep incline, a ramp, say, into an apartment building. You're pushing it up, it's really heavy and it's really hard work. If it is more difficult, the more difficult it is for a person to adopt your new behavior, the less likely they're going to do it. So removing barriers is a very important step. In fact, Daniel Kahneman, who was the first of only two behavioral economists to win a Nobel Prize, says that when you're trying to get people to change their behaviors, the number one thing to do is to remove the barriers that are preventing them from adopting your actions and your behaviors. So we want to remove those. And if we remove barriers and we can make the new thing we want people to do just as easy as what they're doing now, that's a lot better, because then we don't, the other thing doesn't look more attractive. There's equal convenience. But if we can make the new activity easier to do than their old activity, well, that's really, really good, because then it's much easier because it's not inconvenient for them to do so. Convenience is really important. I want to show you an example. I've done a lot of work in waste management, and you may have seen situations like this in fast food restaurants. In fast food restaurants, they often have sorting stations where they've got a cabinet like that, and they'll have 2 or 3 different holes. In Canada, where I live, they'd have 3 holes: a hole for trash, a hole for recyclables, and a hole for organics, food waste. And people are asked to sort. I know from studies and from even talking to people who work in fast food places, that when people do sort, it's so sloppy that you've got recyclables and bottles in with the compost, and you've got food in with the garbage, and it's just such a mess that they all end up throwing it in the same dumpster, and it all goes to the dump. It's very rare that it doesn't all just go to the dump anyways. And so there's one place, an A&W restaurant, that near where I live, they solved this problem. And this problem's been going on. I've been working on this problem for 20 years. And they solved it. They just put these signs up, and it says, "Please leave trays on the table. Sorting is our specialty. Thank you." So they gave up with the seemingly impossible task of getting their customers to properly sort the waste on their tray. And they just said, "Leave it there, we'll sort it," which is great. Plus, it's a better service at no extra cost. And they trained their staff. So instead of trying to train the whole world, they've trained the 3 or 4 people that might be working in their restaurant to how to sort properly for recycling and composting and waste. That's a really good example of of removing the barriers, but also sometimes the audience, the target audience that you can have success with, is not necessarily the person that you may think. It may not be the person that's generating the waste in this case. So I did some more research for the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, and we did ask people do you brush your boots when you come off a trail and brush your pants? And this is what when they said no, we said, well, why not? And this is what the response was. Lack of knowledge was the #1 issue. They didn't know what to look for. They didn't know what to do. Sometimes they didn't know what we were talking about. Others were forgetting. Some people said, well, I just forget to do it. I know I should, but I forget to do it. Others said, you can see just under forgetting there is equipment. I don't have the equipment. And sometimes they'd say, well, I have a brush, but I never remember to bring it with me. So these were the kinds of things that people brought up as barriers. So you want to remove those barriers. Well, how do you do something like that? Like, how do you resolve that knowledge issue? How do you remind them? How do you make sure they have the equipment when they come off the trail to actually brush their boots? Really easy. Give them a boot brush station. And so this boot brush station resolves the three main issues barriers that people throw up when they're asked if they brush their boots or not. They have the knowledge. They say they don't have the knowledge. They don't know what to do. Well, it's pretty simple. Stick your boot in there and move it back and forth. They can read more about it and learn more about it while they're doing it. The equipment is there. They've removed the barrier of not having equipment, and it's a great reminder. And you put it right at the head of the trail, and hopefully people will use it not only when they're coming off the trail, but also before they go on the trail. It's not rocket science, but if you don't do this and you think you're going to get people to start remembering to bring a brush, remembering to do it, to learn how to do it with a simple brochure or a fridge magnet, it's not going to happen. You got to remove those barriers. Here's another example. This one's from aquatic invasive species, but at a project that we worked on, this fellow with the pressure washer is showing the boat owner and his friend how to wash that boat and to clean, drain, and dry it. And while he's showing them, he's saying, it's not really hard. He's already walked around the boat and pointed to areas where there might be a little bit of weed or something that might be attached to the trailer or the boat or the prop, and to remove that. Now he's showing them how you can quickly just walk around, give the boat a spray down, and then he would say, look, pull the plug on the boat and put that motor down for a few minutes and let the cooling water drain out of it. And it doesn't take long, and you can be on your way. So here what we've done is we know that people from surveys have said that they don't know what to do. Again, with boat washing is very similar to boots. They say they don't remember, they don't know what to do, they don't have the equipment, but they also say there's no space at the launches. So we put this equipment in a place where it's off to the side and there is enough space. So we've removed those barriers, the most important thing to do. So the next thing we want to do after we remove barriers is to secure commitments. We want to get commitments from people. Commitments are really quite simple. But people want to be seen to be consistent with what they say. In our society, being consistent with what they say is all about integrity, right? So, and that's a valuable trait. People see that if you're consistent with what they say, they think better of you, and people want to be seen in that light. So when you can get somebody to agree that they're going to clean, drain, and dry their boat, or they are going to brush their pants and get the mud off their boots, or they're going to buy local firewood and burn it locally rather than moving it from one place to another, if they will make that commitment to you, they change their own self-perception. And this is where the behavioral psychology starts to work, because they create within themselves a pressure, some inward pressure that convinces them that they are a person who doesn't move firewood, a person who doesn't move weeds around so that when they're hiking. And they feel a very strong commitment within them to undertake those proper behaviors. So you can obtain commitments in many different ways. This is off the NASMA website, asking people to remove plants, animals, and muds from their boots, gears, pets, and vehicles. And if you go to this page several times, you'll see that the image comes up with different play, clean, go activities. But you can take the pledge and you can give your information. And that's one way of giving commitments. I'll show you another way in a second. I want to make three very important points about commitments. First of all, a verbal commitment is much stronger than no commitment at all. More people will undertake your behavior if they make a verbal commitment to do it than if they just accept your brochure or they just listen to what you've said. We're trying to cross that gap, right? That I talked about before. If they've made a verbal commitment, they're crossing that gap a bit. They're going to cross it. There are more people are going to cross it, or they're more likely to cross it if they've also given you a written commitment, and more so even if they give you a public commitment. So back to those guys that were on the boat. The fellow in the foreground is a fellow that was holding a pressure washer. This is how we typically do it. I train people to what I call is climbing the ladder of commitment. So what he's done is, after he's shown them, and he said, so that wasn't very hard, was it? And they say, no, I guess not. He says, well, you know, it's really important to protect our lakes. You guys like fishing here. You don't want invasive species in there. Can we count on you clean draining and drying your boat in the future? Well, they've just seen how easy it is and everything. Not everybody will agree, but when they do, then they say yes, they've made a verbal commitment and you've moved along that curve. And what we do then is, and what this guy has just done, is we always have a clipboard with a piece of paper on it that looks sort of like a petition. And we say, that's great, thank you. We're keeping track of people, a number of people who are agreeing that they'll clean, drain, and dry their boats. And if you don't mind, could you just add your name to the list? And, you know, we make sure that there's already some names on there from a previous visit or whatever. So, and typically the guy will take it and he'll write his name on it. So now we have a written commitment. He may not even understand he's made a written commitment, but it's much more powerful than the verbal commitment. And then what we do is, while he's signing it, we say, see that little box there beside your name? Just tick that off. We say, if you tick that off, you're just allowing us to use your name or your initials or something to help promote clean, drain, dry, to protect our lakes to other people who we may not see today, we may not be here, but we'll have promotional information about. We want to show that a lot of people are doing this and that other people should do it too. Now, not everybody will tick the box, but if they do, they've made a public commitment. And as I said, public commitments are stronger than written commitments, which are stronger than verbal commitments. Now, the other thing too is, if you don't want to do the box, or you do the box, public commitment box or not, this is a really valuable kind of thing. It doesn't have to be with boats. I'm just using this boat as an example, but you could do something like this with ATVs or all kinds of different things. We typically like to give swag out when we're doing these things to remind people of their commitments and that sort of thing. So this sticker is out of British Columbia. It says, I clean, drain, dry. So what that fellow would do is say, look, thanks guys, you know, I'm glad that you're going to clean, drain, and dry your boats. We've got this nice sticker for you here. You can show other people that you're going to do this, and hopefully when they see it, maybe they'll do it too. And what I would be doing is, I'd be peeling the backing off of that sticker while I'm talking to them. So I've got it half off, and then I'd say, look, let's go over to your boat and your trailer, and where can we put this on there to show your commitment to keeping our lakes clean? And, you know, two good places are on the windshield, if they'll do that. The other place is on the post that comes up on the trailer where the winch is, so that when they climb onto the trailer to winch their boat in, they're seeing that reminder of their commitment to clean, drain, dry. If you can get that onto the trailer and the boat, it's going to be much more effective. Your trailer or boat. And I know from experience, try and get it on then, because if it's just a matter of handing it to them, even with good intentions, they may not do it. Remember, They might have the good, there's an intention behavior gap. They might have the intention of putting that on at a later time, but they might not get around to it. So try and get them to do it, or help them do it, or show them where to do it. Try to get them to do it while you're talking to them. So that's how you go up the, climb the ladder of commitment. The final thing I want to say is we found that it is really important if you're, a lot of these programs that we work on are in the summer months, and we often use students to work on this, on these programs. It's really important to hire people who can ask for commitments, if at all possible. Sometimes it's not, sometimes you kind of have to hire who you can get, but you want people who are not shy, because sometimes people just cannot bring themselves to that point where they talked about the boot brush stations and all of that, and they just can't bring themselves to say, can we count on you using the boot brush stations? I don't know if it's fear of rejection or whatever it is, but they can't bring themselves to say it. And what we're finding is that at the end of a summer, when we do an evaluation of a program, we find out that they didn't ask for the commitments. And if they haven't, all they've done is what you've always done: tried to raise awareness, tried to increase the attitude, and you're stuck still facing that intention behavior gap. So you want to hire people and train them and say, this is part of your job here. You're not done talking to that person until you ask them for commitments. When I'm working on these programs, anybody that gets within 6 feet of me is going to be asked for a commitment, even if it's over the phone. I'm going to ask them for a commitment when I'm finished the conversation, and your staff have to do the same thing. So there's the ladder of commitment. Keep that in mind. So let me just now talk about reminders. Reminders are really important. Reminders help people to remember about their commitments and what to do, when to do it. It's really important with reminders that they have the information that people need at the right time, at the place where they're making the decision on what they're going to do. And so that photo of me in the morning shows my first instruction of the day before I've had my coffee. Reminders, as I say, they support the commitments. I remember when I was in my first job after school, there was a sign beside our coffee pot that said, last one out turns off the coffee pot. The coffee pot was way back in the kitchen. The front door where everybody left was out at the front of the building. So if the last person, when they were leaving, they weren't going to see that sign that says last one out turns off the coffee pot. It doesn't make any sense to have it beside the coffee pot. The place where a person's making the decision whether or not they're the last one out is at the door. So you put a sign at the door that says last one out turns off the coffee pot or turns off the lights, and then they will look at it and go, oh, yeah, I guess I'm the last one. I better go back and turn off that coffee pot. So it's important to have it in the right place. Somebody once said to me, we got to get some fridge magnets. Everybody loves fridge magnets. We'll get clean, drain, and dry fridge magnets. Well, that's great if you are going to keep your boat in your kitchen, and then you've got a nice reminder right where you need it to maybe turn the faucet on and splash water on the boat. Most people don't do that. You want to have the sign where they're coming off of the water. Prompts are very simple and effective. It's important to have the right information, but do it concisely because people don't really want to spend the time reading. And they need to be in the right place at the right time, like this one. I took this photo in an airplane bathroom. And I often see I notice signs because of the work that I do. Usually there's a sign like this, but it's on where you pull the paper towels out. It says, don't flush it. That's not the right place. The right place is right there. In order to flush a paper towel down the toilet, you have to lift that lid. And that's the right place to have that sign. It's as soon as you see the lid, it says, do not flush that thing. Put it in the garbage. All right, so that's reminders. We're going to talk about peer pressure now. I want you to think back to that curve. And when we've got these, as I said, we get the early adopters, those people that join right away. They'll join as soon as you bring up the issue because they're sold on it already, even before you talk to them. It's like, and talk to somebody who really believes in climate change. You say you should turn down your thermostats at night or put in a programmable thermostat. They're probably going to do it. The next people, that early majority where we're starting to get to the halfway, those are the people that we're going to reach when we remove the barriers and we secure commitments and we help with the reminders. To get the next group of people, we're going to leverage peer pressure because, as I said, we're past a tipping point now, and hopefully we've got a lot of people that are undertaking behaviors. When I do my, I want to show you some examples of peer pressure here in social norms. When I do my workshops live, I ask people, who here has gone to a big event, sporting event or other event where they play the national anthem? Virtually everybody puts their hand up. And so there's the Denver Broncos, and you can see this in the stands, everybody's standing up for the national anthem. So I say, if you've been there and the national anthem plays, what do you do? And they say, well, you stand up and you take your hat off if you have one, and you put your hand over your heart, and you sing along, or you're quiet for the national anthem. I say, okay, great. And then I say, well, who does that? And virtually everybody puts up their hand. And that's great. So then I point to people and say, well, why do you do that? Why do you stand for the national anthem and put your hand over your heart? And they say, because it's patriotism. It's the right thing to do for your country. Shows love of country. It's a patriotic act. And so I say, that's great. That's fantastic. And then I say, okay, so let's say you're not lucky enough to have tickets for the Broncos game, and you're sitting at home on your couch and you're watching the game, and the national anthem comes on. Who here put up your hand if you stand up in your living room, get off the couch, stand up in your living room, put your hand over your heart for the national anthem? And usually if there's about 100 people or so in the audience, you'll get one, maybe two people that'll put up their hand, and that's fine. But everybody else doesn't have their hand up. And then I say, okay, so are you not patriotic when you're at home? And the snickers start. And then I say, okay, so why is it again that you stand up for the national anthem in the stadium? And somebody will say, it's because everybody else is doing it. And I say, yeah. Now, who agrees with that? And virtually everybody puts up their hand. The thing is that if there's 80,000 people at the football stadium and you don't stand up for the national anthem, 79,999 people are saying, look at that arsehole over there who's not standing for the national anthem. There's an incredible peer pressure. And it is serious peer pressure, as Colin Kaepernick found out when he decided to kneel during the national anthem. So here's another example. Social norms change from time to time. When I was a kid, I would, if I coughed, my mom said, you got to put your hand over your mouth. You got to put your hand over your mouth to suppress the bugs that come out of your mouth, the viruses and that sort of thing. So the germs and stop the germs from coming out so nobody else gets sick. And so I was taught, and many of us were, to cough into our fists. And of course, essentially back then, if you coughed and you didn't have your fist over your mouth, that was bad. If you coughed and you had your fist over your mouth, that was good. So this woman was good for doing this. And that was the case until people realized that, well, if you cough into your fist and then you shake somebody's hand, you're kind of doing what those doctors and nurses are doing when they don't wash their hands going from one patient to another. And they thought, we got to stop that. So they said the new protocol is to cough into your sleeve or into your elbow, because then you're not getting all that crap on your hands and you're not passing on the germs. So that's great. I think that's really important. I try to remember to cough into my elbow. But suddenly this woman's bad. She was good for decades. That's the good thing. Look at her. She's so responsible. Now it's, look at her. Look how irresponsible she is. She's going to make everybody sick. And that's the difference in social norms, right? The pressure was to do that, and now the pressure is to do that. So social norms can change, and we can change social norms. A good example of social norm promotion and a feedback, which is a really big part of behavior change as well is the United Way thermometers that you see in communities. The United Way thermometer reminds people who have not yet made their pledge to the United Way that they should. They're typically in at high volume intersections or along high volume roadways. It's seen by a lot of people, and when people drive by it and they see it going up and they haven't given yet, they feel compelled. They say, oh, geez, I got to remember, I got to make my United Way pledge. Other people who have made their pledge, they like watching it going up, and they say, and they think, I'm part of that. I'm part of that community activity because I've already given, and they can feel good about it. So that again helps to strengthen that social norm. And social norms are also social norms and can also be reminders. So this is a sign that was put up in British Columbia. Those two gentlemen had just put the sign up before the picture was taken, and it's right beside a boat launch, as you can see. When somebody comes out of the water, they have to drive right past that sign. So there's peer pressure involved, because if there's other people around and you just drive by and take off, don't clean and drain dry your boat, that you're not going to be well thought of by other people around you. But it's also the reminder to do it so you don't forget, because that's one of the big barriers. Not knowing what to do is a big barrier. So it has all the information you need, where to look on your boat, how to clean, drain, and dry, and all of that information. So sometimes the elements that we use can have multiple purposes. It can be a reminder. It can be a peer pressure. When that sticker that I talked about, if you can get it onto the boat windshield, that's provides peer pressure to others. It's a public commitment, and it's a reminder that when the guy sees it, or the woman who owns the boat sees it, they are reminded that they are the type of person who cleans, drains, and dries their boat. I'm going to use one more example of social norms to wrap up this presentation. This is going to make more sense to the men that are watching it than the women, perhaps, or the men will understand it easier. When you walk into a public washroom and you're a man, you're often faced with what looks like 3 choices if you have to pee. But there aren't 3 choices really, because of social norms. If we think of those urinals as A, B, and C from left to right, it's okay to go in either A or C. You can go in, pick either one of those, because if you pick A, then the next person that comes in can pick C and maintain the important buffer. Or if you pick C, the next person can come in and go into A and maintain the important buffer. But neither the first person in or the second person in is allowed to go in B, because that's just too close. You don't have the buffer. The third person, it's okay. But it's important to have that buffer socially, and especially during the summer when people are wearing sandals. Just kidding about that bit. But this is a very real social norm. And you can express that with the universal urinal etiquette signage that shows you can use the 2 outside urinals, but you must not use urinal B if there's only 2 people there. So that's the social norm. It's not a social norm to hold your hands straight out like that when you're using a urinal. I don't think that's a really good idea, but you can get the idea of how important social norms are. So finally, I just want to wrap up with looking at the consciousness, subconsciousness, unconscious again. We want to try and drive those behaviors into the subconscious and not leave them in the consciousness of people. And that way they are ingrained habits and people do it without even thinking about it anymore. And again, with the innovation adoption curve, we've worked through those early adopters and the innovators right across. Started using introduced the barrier reduction, the commitments, and reminders to get those early majority people involved. And then we've built the social norms that help get those late majority and maybe even some of those laggards on board with our new behavior. So thank you very much for your attention. My information is there, that QR code over on the right. And I don't know if you've been able to see it during the presentations. On the bottom right, it's the same QR code. If you're interested, I have a behavior change newsletter that I put out every Friday. And if you aim your iPhone, if you have an iPhone at that with your camera, it will automatically take you to that www.beyondattitude.com link, or if you can scan it if your phone's not an iPhone, or you can just type in www.beyondattitude.com, go to my website, and as I say, if you're interested, you can subscribe to the Behavior Change Friday newsletter I put out. And if it's ever something that you determine you don't really want, you can unsubscribe. So thanks very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.